Going to lavish praise on the Scottish Government this week. The SNP are hiking taxes and spending like there was no tomorrow and failing to deliver on decent public services. If you pay lip service to the deterrent, if that is all you do, if you waver in your total commitment to it, if you are no longer credible, it ceases to become a deterrent. The SNP have mismanaged their budget despite cutting 1.2 billion spending of public services. And of course, the most spectacular is the fact that they have paid the cost of 24 ferries for just 2 vessels. I'm going to lavish praise on the Scottish Government this week because their First Minister's achieved a landmark achievement, credit where credit is due. He has the honour of being the first SNP First Minister in its entire history not to have been arrested. Quite an achievement. I shan't go over what I have previously said to the Honourable Lady, the shadow leader on the Economy on Privileges Committee, but let me be very specific about the points the Honourable Lady raises. And she is right. As Defence Secretary, I, in my 85 days, I think I was in office, gave all of our armed forces a pay rise, including making sure that no one that ever serves in our armed forces will earn less than the national living wage. And I think that is a very important principle. But she will know that we care deeply about the welfare of our armed forces and indeed their financial resilience. That is why this government is compensating armed forces personnel in Scotland for the additional tax that they are having to pay under the Scottish Government. We think that is a very important point. She, again, and it is a regular theme, criticises the UK government for our obligations under the law, our overreach on devolution, as she sees it, and our democratic obligations. I would just gently point out to her that she might have more credibility on these matters if the Scottish government had not been found to repeatedly have been in breach of the Scotland Act. They have been touring the world at Scottish taxpayers' expense, undermining our union, undermining our armed forces and the nuclear deterrent, and undermining referendums and democracy. And in doing so, I have to say, undermining the Scottish Government's credibility and their arguments that they are trying to mount against us. And I'd ask her to reflect on that. Scotland's Auditor-General has revealed that they are unable to account for billions of pounds worth of business COVID support grants that were handed to the Scottish Government because of gaps in data. The SNP have made it impossible for the auditors to fully understand how 4.4 billion of grants and business reliefs were distributed between March 2020 and October 2021. So I say, thank heavens for the Secretary of State for Scotland, because he is standing up for the interests of the businesses and the residents of Scotland. The SNP have mismanaged their budget despite cutting 1.2 billion spending of public services. They had a £100 million overspend. I would just remind her and compare our record on caring for children. We have 400,000 fewer children in absolute poverty than when we took office in 2010. And we also, as I mentioned in my remarks earlier to the shadow leader of the House, we've had good news in terms of improving life opportunities for children in England, with the good news that English schools have dramatically improved our reading performance. Now for 9 and 10-year-olds, we are 4th best in the world. That's having inherited a situation where in 2012 only 58% of 6-year-olds were able to read fluently. In contrast, in Scotland, both on health and education, the SNP is letting the children of Scotland down. We've got the worst ever gap gap between the richest and poorest pupils thanks to botched reform, and literacy rates were falling before the pandemic, and they've dropped dramatically further still. The only thing the SNP have managed to increase in education is the tax burden on teachers. But she raises the very serious matter of the infected blood inquiry. And I have to say that I have had the privilege of meeting many of those who were infected and affected by this appalling scandal. And I went to hear some of the evidence that they gave at the inquiry. It may fall to us in this place on our shift to put this right, but we must put it right. And there is not just the original injustice that was done to these people, many of whom were children at the time. It is also the further layers of injustice that have happened with regard to their financial resilience. Many of them lost their homes, they were not able to work, as well as appalling stigma and hardship that came with that. We have to put that right. That is why this government set up, concurrently running with that inquiry, the compensation scheme review, because we very much wanted, when that inquiry reports, to be able to make amends for that scandal. I think it would be an excellent topic for debate, and I know that many members in this House would want to attend if that was secured. The SNP are hiking taxes and spending like there was no tomorrow, and failing to deliver on decent public services. We've heard this week that those ferries, which are so massively overdue, will now cost more to finish than to do a complete new build. And we know that Scottish ministers appreciate the difficulty and impact on their constituents and the travelling public, because in order for them to visit the island of Rum, they had to hire their own boat in order to do so, because they were not able to use the ferry services. I wonder if the Honourable Lady and her colleagues have read any of Audit Scotland's reports or acted on any of their recommendations. They have no concept of the catalogue now that we have of arrests, raids, multiple police investigations on the mismanagement of their party finances, and how negatively this has reflected on Scottish politics, and the poor stewardship of public funds, and an increasing question about the ongoing saga of the Scottish National Investment Bank. Mr. Speaker, we are not just wondering how much longer those Calmac ferries will be in the dock, but also how many SNP figures will as well. I am delighted that the SNP, and genuinely delighted that they have found some auditors. With nearly 2,000 accountancy and auditing firms in Scotland, I was interested as to who they would pick to do the job. Perhaps someone from the Honourable Lady's constituency, given that Edinburgh is Europe's second largest financial centre, second only to the City of London. Yet the SNP have had to go to Manchester in order to find someone willing to take on the task. Presumably the Honourable Lady would view this as offshoring. Perhaps now they could turn their attention to their dire mishandling of Scottish finances and the recommendations of Audit Scotland. I remind this House that the SNP have been forced to raise income tax after a £100 million budget overspend, despite cutting public expenditure by £1.2 billion this year. The Scottish people deserve better than that. And I know that she and her colleagues did not necessarily celebrate the coronation, but I would just say that they can learn a lesson from it. You can't achieve anything with division and hate. The only way forward is service, duty and love. We are the government that gave the Scottish people, as well as other residents of the United Kingdom, a vote on their future, both for Scottish independence and also for Brexit. The difference between her party and mine is that we honour the results of referendums. But I know that the Honourable Lady and her party have been campaigning very hard on the two-child policy this week. So let me illustrate the powers and the opportunities that are sat in the Honourable Lady's party's hands. It may interest the Honourable Lady to know that the projected black hole in the SNP's budget, identified by the Scottish Fiscal Commission, a huge £1.9 billion in the next 4 years, is not only enough money to reverse that policy in Scotland, but reverse it for the whole of the UK. And as a minister at DWP, I was amazed at the lengths that the SNP would go to not to take control over many aspects of welfare policy that we wish to devolve to them, instead choosing not to take up these powers, but criticise the UK government for the decisions that it was taking. The Honourable Lady's party are in power in Scotland. It pains me that they are, but they are, and they have been in power for many, many years, and it is time they took some responsibility. The SNP have the worst record of managing this problem, the worst record of drug deaths in Europe, and also do not fare well with regard to water pollution. I think this may have been a reason why the SNP have put out a complaint about the DEFRA secretary, wanting her to go to Hollywood to be drilled by their colleagues there. But it is this House that will hold the Secretary of State to account, and so her colleagues will have to enjoy their biscuits without coffee in Hollywood, which makes for a nice change from their Westminster colleagues, who I understand have been having a lot of meetings with their chief whip with coffee but without biscuits. On the final point that the Honourable Lady raises with regard to the statement today, I shall look into that because it is a courtesy and people should expect to be able to see statements in advance. The Honourable Lady did a very good job of filling in for her colleague, but they were probably wanting to be here, and I certainly would have liked to have heard what questions they would have asked. The SNP, after all, which wishes to have an independent Scotland in NATO, do not realise that that is incompatible with their position on nuclear weapons, as stated by the former First Minister. It is also incompatible with the fudge on this issue that the current First Minister has proposed and that is in the SNP's white paper on this matter. And I would take this opportunity, again, I thank the Honourable Lady for forwarding me it, to remind all honourable members that if you pay lip service to the deterrent, if that is all you do, if you waver in your total commitment to it, if you are no longer credible, it ceases to become a deterrent. And when it ceases to become a deterrent, we become a target. Only an SNP spokesman would come to this question session and ask me a question about police investigations and police performance. Maybe that self-delusion is hard to sustain in the wake of tens of police investigations, of more news this week of missing accounts frustrating the SNP's auditors from being able to complete their task, and also of news of exactly how much Scottish taxpayers' money has been spent by the SNP on just one of their foreign jollies. For COP27, they blew nearly £150,000, and not content with their, staying in Sharm el-Sheikh and flying back to Scotland, they also managed to do an overnight in Milan. No wonder so many of the honourable gentleman's colleagues are heading off. Quitting because the going is too tough in opposition is really quite something. Can I start just by welcoming the fantastic export figures that Scotland has had recently announced? I think that's a fantastic tribute to the incredible creative businesses and producers that Scotland has, and I congratulate them on that. I very much enjoyed his discussion about rail travel in Scotland, with no regard to the Scottish Nationalist Government's record on ScotsRail. And I was also briefly cheered this week, as we're on the topic of transport, that ferry services, this is good news, ferry services were being stood up on the Eust route. But then news reached me that due to demand outstripping availability, anyone in a camper van is not allowed to use those services. I'm sure it is nothing personal. I don't wish to give a long answer, Mr. Speaker. It would upset the honourable gentleman and yourself. But just to say, I'm very sorry that the SNP has taken such an enormous time over the past week, again discussing independence and not cancer care or drug deaths or failing education standards or violent crime at its highest since 2014, or indeed their dismal record on climate change policies. I hope they would get back soon to talking about the issues that their constituents are facing. I don't think this government should take any lessons from the SNP government that has nearly £2 billion between what it spends and what is in its budget. But in addition to understanding cost and the price of everything, I think it is also important that us in this place understand the value of things. Trident is the nuclear deterrent. First of all, there is no blank cheque for the nuclear deterrent, but it is there doing a vitally important job. If honourable members in this place can't see the merits of us having a deterrent at this moment, I don't know that they're ever going to be able to grasp this. Given that any arguments about defence of this nation are commitment to NATO, which the SNP purport to support, but commitments to having a nuclear deterrent are pretty fundamental to being a member of NATO. If all those arguments have failed in the past, let me try a new one, because I'm sure among her constituents she will have a submariner. And she should ask that submariner why they're prepared to spend 10 years of their lives underwater in service of this country. These are not trivial matters, and really the Honourable Lady needs to grasp the reality of the situation facing us. Whatever our differences and whichever side of the House we sit on, I think that is something we should all be able to agree on, that trust and confidence in these systems is vitally important, and that's why standards matter, that's why having strong democratic institutions matter. We've had now, I think, over 22 police investigations into the SNP. The original £600,000 plus that went missing has now been exceeded by the £800,000 in police time that has been spent on these investigations. It is a very sad and sorry state. I hope whatever shape future investigations take, it is resolved swiftly, because I think it has been a very sorry chapter.
Patricia Gibson.
Yes, I'm afraid this is the latest wheeze from the SNP to risk jobs and burn taxpayers' money. Let us not forget, this is the party that during the pandemic hired a testing firm at the cost of £10 million that promptly furloughed all of its staff. In fairness to them, they did try and guarantee some jobs. They paid a company the tune of £5 million per job, and then failed to secure any of those jobs. Audit Scotland said of the Scottish Government it had no framework to deal with the private sector. And of course, the most spectacular is the fact that they have paid the cost of 24 ferries for just 2 vessels. An individual this week, Fergus, who is from Inverness, who's worked in the legal profession many years and will shortly be drawing his pension, is really dismayed at what is happening in Scotland. He's against the deposit return scheme. He wants someone to come and sort that out. He's against the ill-thought-out protected marine areas. He's against the SNP's transition from oil and gas, and he's against the SNP riding roughshod over the UK Equality Acts. And what would the Honourable Lady's advice to Fergus to be? What would she suggest to him, given that Fergus is actually an SNP member of the Scottish Parliament and this week voted to support a motion of no confidence in his own government's co-leader? I've got some advice for Fergus. Fill out an application form to join the Conservative Party and hand it to the Honourable Member for Moray, who is standing up for his countrymen and his nation. I gently point out to him that the Scottish Government have spent rather a lot of money and time on preparing for independence, which is not the outcome of the referendum that was held. And I would also suggest that if he wants to preach prudence, he might also like to talk to an SNP local authority, who this week seems to have decided their main mission isn't emptying the bins or sorting out education. It's actually trying to ban bouncy castles. The SNP have done their best not to take up powers that were given to them. I remember my frustration at DWP when they had powers to act on welfare. They would rather criticise what the Westminster government was doing than take responsibility and power that was offered to them to actually do their own thing. I wonder why that is. It's because the SNP wants power, but they don't want to be held responsible or accountable for delivering services. And I'm afraid the people of Scotland are finding them out on that. We could talk about the dividend to every Scottish household being part of the UK, the tax dividend to them. We could talk about the various schemes the UK government has given to support people through the cost of living issues we're facing, most recently the enormous package on energy pricing. We could also discuss the SNP's record on drugs, on health, on education, even perhaps bin collection. And finally, the SNP's total lack of self-awareness about their own tragic record. Yeah.